This is a story about Constantinople, the queen of cities, the crossroads of the world, and the ordinary people who filled it with color and sound and scent in the long golden summer of 1054. It is a story about a man who made sacred images from gold and glass, and the daughter who learned his craft by watching his hands, about a silk dyer whose vats turned raw thread into crimson and indigo, and whose eldest son dreamed of something beyond the workshop walls, about a woman who blended rosewater and frankincense in a perfume shop near the imperial palace, and who was learning slowly what it meant to want something for herself again. These are people whose names were never written down in any chronicle, but they lived here in this city between two seas, and for one summer their lives moved together like threads on a loom, each one ordinary, and together something more. There is a place where Europe reaches toward Asia across a narrow ribbon of water, and where, for more than 700 years, a city has stood that the world calls many names. The Greeks who live here call it simply the city, as though no other city need be mentioned. The Arabs who trade here call it the red apple, a prize glowing on the horizon. The sailors who approach it from the Sea of Marmara at first light see the domes and columns rising from the hills like something imagined, something too beautiful to be built by ordinary hands, and they call it the Queen of Cities, and they are not wrong. Let us arrive there now, in the last week of April, in the year 1054 years after the birth of Christ. The air is cool and smells of salt water and stone, and the faintest trace of bread baking somewhere below the great colonnaded avenue called the Mese, where the marble paving stones are still dark with dew. The sun has not yet risen above the Asian hills across the Bosporus, but the sky to the east is turning the color of pale honey, and in the harbor of the Golden Horn, the first fishing boats are already moving, their lanterns swinging gently as they slip between the anchored cargo ships. Somewhere a church bell rings, not the great bells of Hagia Sophia, not yet, but a smaller bell, a parish bell, the kind that marks the hours for the people of a single neighborhood, calling the faithful to the office of Orthros, the dawn prayer. And in a narrow workshop on a side street just south of the Forum of Constantine, a man named Theodoros is already awake and working. The workshop is small, perhaps 10 paces wide, with a wooden door that opens onto the colonnade, and a second door at the back that leads to a courtyard shared with the neighboring buildings. The front room is where the work happens, and even in the dim light of a single oil lamp, it is a room that rewards careful looking. Along one wall, shelves hold small clay vessels, dozens of them, each containing a different color of powdered glass, blues the shade of deep water, greens like young leaves, reds that range from the warmth of fired clay to the startling brightness of crushed garnets. On the work table, tools are arranged with the kind of precision that speaks of long habit. Fine pointed tweezers, a small hammer, a set of pliers with jaws no wider than a fingernail, a charcoal brazier for heating, and several thin rods of gold wire, each no thicker than a strand of hair. This is the workshop of a cloisonné enamelist, a maker of sacred images in gold and glass, and Theodoros has worked here for nearly 30 years. He is in his early 50s, a lean man with a closely trimmed gray beard and deep-set eyes that have spent a lifetime focused on things no larger than a thumbnail. His father was a leather worker. Theodoros came to this craft not through inheritance, but through apprenticeship, taken on at 12 by a master enamelist who saw something in the boy's steadiness, his patience, his willingness to sit for hours repeating a single motion until the gold wire bent exactly as it should. That master is long dead now. The workshop is Theodoros's own, and in it he has made reliquary crosses and book covers and small devotional icons for churches and monasteries across the city, each one a miniature world of shimmering color. The face of Christ rendered in glass no larger than a coin, the Virgin's robes flowing in lines of gold finer than any pen could draw. This morning he is working on a pendant, a small oval meant to hold an image of the Archangel Michael, commissioned by a minor court official for his wife. The gold base plate, no larger than the pad of his thumb, sits clamped in a wooden vise on the table. Theodoros holds a length of gold wire in his left hand and his fine-tipped pliers in his right, and he bends the wire slowly, carefully, shaping the curve of the Archangel's wing. He works in silence. The oil lamp casts a steady amber glow across his hands, and for a long time the only sound is the faint tick of metal against metal and the low murmur of the city waking beyond the door. And then his right hand trembles. It is a small thing, a flutter, barely visible, lasting no more than a heartbeat. The wire does not slip. The curve holds. But Theodoros pauses, sets down the pliers, and flexes his fingers slowly, opening and closing his hand as though testing something. He has noticed this before, a few times in recent weeks, always in the early morning, always when the work is finest. It passes. It always passes. He picks up the pliers again and returns to the wing of the Archangel, and the wire bends true, and the morning continues as every morning does. But something has shifted in the stillness of the room, a knowledge that lives below the surface of his attention, patient and quiet, and not yet ready to be named. By the time the light through the doorway turns from gray to gold, Theodoros has finished the wire outline of the Archangel's upper body, the sweep of the wings, the curve of the halo, the shoulders, and the folds of the robe. The base plate now holds a tiny labyrinth of gold walls, each one defining a space that will later be filled with colored glass and fired in the small kiln at the back of the workshop until the glass melts and fuses, becoming something luminous and permanent. But that is hours away, days away. The wire work alone will take the better part of a week, and Theodoros is a man who does not rush. He hears footsteps in the courtyard, light, familiar, and a moment later his daughter Eleni comes through the back door carrying a clay jug of water and a round of bread wrapped in cloth. She is in her mid-20s, dark-haired, with her father's careful hands and her mother's wider face. She sets the bread on the edge of the work table and pours water into 2 cups without being asked, and for a few minutes they eat together in the companionable silence of people who have shared this room for many years. Eleni glances at the pendant in the vise, at the new wirework, and Theodoros sees her eyes trace the shape of the wing, not casually, but with the attention of someone who understands what she is looking at. She says nothing. She tears her bread and eats, and when she is finished, she moves to the shelf of powdered glass and begins preparing the colors they will need when the wirework is complete, grinding a small piece of blue glass against a stone mortar with the same quiet focus her father brings to the wire. She has been doing this since she was a girl, grinding glass, cleaning tools, preparing the adhesive that holds the wire in place before firing. She knows the workshop the way she knows her own body, by feel, by instinct, by the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 hours spent watching and helping. What Theodoros has not yet allowed himself to fully see is that she has moved beyond helping. The sketches she makes on wax tablets in the evenings, designs for pieces no one has commissioned, images that play with light and color in ways that are subtly, unmistakably her own, sit stacked in a corner of the back room, unseen by anyone but her. The morning bell of the parish church rings again, marking the end of the dawn office, and the street outside begins to fill with the sounds of the day. The clatter of a cart on the marble paving, the calls of vendors setting up their stalls, the low conversation of neighbors greeting each other on their way to the baker or the fountain. Constantinople is waking, and the work of the day has begun. The dye works sit where the city meets the water, in a quarter along the southern shore of the Golden Horn, where the air smells of salt and chemicals and the faintly acrid tang of heated mordant baths. It is not the most beautiful part of Constantinople. The buildings here are functional: low stone walls, heavy wooden doors, courtyards open to the sky so that the fumes from the vats can rise and disperse. Lengths of dyed silk hang drying on wooden frames in the yards, and on a good day, when the breeze comes off the water just right, they move like the banners of some strange and gorgeous army. Sheets of deep indigo beside rivers of crimson, pale saffron yellow next to the dark brownish red that comes from the shells of oak galls. The colors are extraordinary, the smell is not. Meletios does not notice the smell anymore. He has worked in the dye trade since he was old enough to stir a vat, and the sharp mineral scent of alum and the earthy sweetness of fermented indigo and the copper-bright tang of the kermes bath are simply the way the world smells to him, as unremarkable as the scent of bread is to a baker. He is in his late 30s, broad-shouldered and thick-armed from years of lifting waterlogged fabric and working the heavy wooden paddles that turn the silk in the vats. His hands are the most remarkable thing about him, if you are paying attention. They are permanently stained, the right hand a deep reddish blue from years of testing dye baths with his fingers, the left a shade lighter, mottled with indigo at the knuckles and crimson in the creases of his palm. He has tried everything to lighten them. His wife Zoe jokes that she married a man with beautiful hands and woke up beside a man who looks like he has been picking berries in his sleep for 20 years. This morning Meletios is standing over the largest of his 3 dye vats, watching the color develop in a length of raw silk that has been soaking since yesterday evening. The silk came in from the raw silk merchants near the Forum, a good batch, clean and evenly dressed, ready for color. The client wants a deep blue, the kind that wealthy families use for curtains and bed covers, and Meletios has prepared the indigo bath with his usual care, the dried indigo cakes crushed and dissolved in an alkaline solution of aged urine and wood ash, left to ferment for 3 days until the surface of the liquid turns a coppery green that tells him the vat is alive and ready. When he lifts the silk from the bath with the wooden paddle, it emerges looking not blue, but a sickly yellow-green, and he watches. This is the part he loves, the part that still feels like a small miracle after all these years, as the air touches the wet fabric and the color begins to change. The indigo oxidizes, the green shifts, deepens, blooms into blue. In the space of a few breaths, the silk transforms, and Meletios judges the depth of the color with an eye that no instrument could match, an eye trained by his father and his father's father before that. He lowers the silk back into the vat. It will need 2 more immersions to reach the depth the client wants. Each time, the blue will deepen. Each time, he will lift it and watch the air do its work and decide one more dip or enough. This is the dyer's art, and it cannot be taught from a book. It lives in the hands and the eyes and the accumulated memory of 1,000 batches done and judged and done again. His son Nikos is in the courtyard behind him, supposed to be sorting the dried kermes insects, the tiny scaled creatures gathered from oak trees in Greece and shipped to Constantinople in linen sacks that produce the most vivid and expensive red dye in the workshop. Sorting kermes is tedious work. The insects must be separated by size and quality, the best ones set aside for the finest commissions, the lesser ones reserved for everyday work. Nikos is 16, tall for his age, with his mother's fair coloring and a restless energy that makes the painstaking work of sorting feel like a punishment. His hands move through the dried insects mechanically, but his eyes drift to the harbor visible through the courtyard gate, where a merchant vessel from Trebizond is unloading cargo, its deck piled with bundles and crates from the eastern trade routes. He watches the sailors moving on the dock, the porters carrying loads on their backs, and something in his face opens in a way that it does not open when he looks at the vats. Meletios sees this. He has been seeing it for months now, the way his son's attention slides away from the work, the way his questions about the trade have become less frequent, replaced by questions about other things. What do the scribes study at the university? How does a man enter the imperial bureaucracy? What languages do the merchants from Trebizond speak? Meletios does not know how to answer most of these questions. He is a dyer. His father was a dyer. The guild is his world, and it is a good world, honest, stable, respected if not glamorous. He has always assumed that Nikos would step into it as naturally as he did, that the knowledge in his hands would pass to his son's hands, that the vats and the colors and the careful art of transformation would continue for another generation. He has not yet found the words for the feeling that is growing in him, not anger, not disappointment, but something more like bewilderment, the slow recognition that his son might love something he cannot teach. He calls to Nikos without turning around. The boy comes, and Meletios shows him the silk emerging from the indigo bath, the way the color blooms on contact with air. He describes what he sees, the undertone of green that means the vat needs more fermentation, the evenness of the color that tells him the silk was properly prepared. Nikos listens, he nods, he asks no questions, and Meletios lowers the silk back into the blue and says nothing more, because what he wants to say, watch this, remember this, love this the way I love it, is not something that words can carry. The perfumer's quarter begins where the mazy narrows and curves toward the chalky gate of the great palace, and if you were to walk there on a warm morning in late April, you would smell it before you saw it. The shops are arranged in a row along the colonnaded street. Their wide doorways open to the air, and the mingled fragrance of their wares drifts upward into the arcade. Frankincense and musk, rosewater and cinnamon, the sharp green note of fresh myrtle, and the deeper resinous warmth of storax from the forests of southwestern Asia Minor. The Book of the Eparch, which governs the guilds of the city, specifies that the perfumers shall keep their stalls here, in this row, so that the aroma may rise to the icon of Christ above the bronze arcade and fill the vestibule of the royal palace. It is a regulation, but it is also, in its way, a kind of poetry. The idea that the work of ordinary craftspeople might perfume the threshold of the sacred. Soteria's shop is the fourth in the row. It is not the largest, but it is well kept. The marble door frame swept clean each morning, the shelves inside arranged with a care that borders on devotion. Small glass vessels of colored perfume line the upper shelves like jewels. Below them, larger clay jars hold the raw materials, chunks of pale frankincense resin, dark twists of myrrh, pouches of dried spikenard root from India, stoppered bottles of musk and ambergris that arrived by ship from the eastern trade routes. On the work table at the back, a brass balance scale sits beside a mortar and pestle, and the surface of the table is marked with the faint circular stains of 1,000 compounds mixed and measured over the years. Soteria is 42. She has run this shop alone for 3 years, since her husband Petros died of a fever that took him in less than a week, healthy on a Monday, buried on a Sunday. They had run the shop together for nearly 15 years, and the knowledge she carries is as much his as hers, his recipes, his suppliers, his understanding of which customers wanted the heavy sweetness of concentrated rose oil, and which preferred the lighter, sharper brightness of citron and mastic. When he died, the guild had not known quite what to do with her. A widow could inherit a business, this was clear in law, but the Perfumers' Guild had not had a woman running a shop in living memory. There were questions. There were visits from the guild's exarchs, polite but pointed, inquiring whether she intended to sell, whether she might remarry a man of the trade. She did not sell, she did not remarry. She paid her guild fees, maintained her suppliers, kept her scales calibrated to the eparch's standards, and gradually, through the simple persistence of being competent, she became an ordinary fact of the street. Soteria, the perfumer, the widow with the good rose water. This morning she is taking inventory. The rose season is coming. Late May, early June, when the damask roses that grow in the gardens and monasteries and along the hedgerows of the city burst into bloom and the perfumer's year reaches its peak. Rose oil and rose water are the foundation of her trade, used in everything from church rituals to household scenting to the preparation of cosmetics and medicines. The picking must happen before the morning dew dries from the petals, and the flowers must reach the workshop within hours to preserve the fragrance. She will need to arrange her pickers, women from the neighborhood mostly, who earn a few coins each season, gathering roses from the monastery gardens and the open land within the walls. She will need to check her distilling equipment, the glass alembic and the copper vessel that heats the rose petals in water, capturing the steam and condensing it into the precious liquid. She makes a list in her head, moving along the shelves, touching each jar as she passes, and the familiar gestures of preparation steady her in a way that is hard to explain, the knowledge that the season is coming, that there is work to do, that the roses will bloom whether she is ready for them or not. There is a small icon of the Virgin in a wooden frame on the wall above the doorway. Petros hung it there when they first opened the shop. Soteria has kept it, has kept, in fact, almost everything as it was, the same arrangement of shelves, the same position of the work table, the same small stool by the door where Petros used to sit in the late afternoons, greeting customers as they passed on the mese. She does not sit on the stool. She has never sat on it. It remains where it is, empty, and she moves around it the way water moves around a stone, naturally, without thinking, and with a current that only she can feel. A customer arrives, a household servant sent to buy frankincense for the family's icon lamp. Soteria weighs the resin on the brass scale, wraps it in a twist of linen, accepts the coins, and offers a quiet word about how to burn it slowly on a low charcoal so the scent lasts longer. The servant thanks her and leaves, and the shop is quiet again, and the morning light moves slowly along the row of colored glass vessels on the upper shelf, and the fragrance of the place, layered, complex, impossible to separate into its individual parts, hangs in the air like a memory that belongs to the room itself. By early May, the days are growing longer, and the streets of Constantinople are taking on their summer character, the colonnades filling with vendors selling fruit and cold drinks, the fountains running slower as the water table drops, the evening stretching out so that the sky above the rooftop stays light long after the last church bell has rung for vespers. It is a time of year when the line between indoors and outdoors softens, when meals are taken in courtyards and conversation happens on rooftops, and the whole city seems to exhale and expand. On the feast day of Saints Constantine and Helena, the 21st of May, the neighborhood gathers. It is not a grand feast, not the kind that fills the hippodrome or brings processions through the Mesi, but a parish celebration, the kind that marks the calendar of ordinary life. The small church of St. Anastasia, which serves the workshops and homes near the Forum of Constantine, holds a morning liturgy, and afterward the families of the quarter share a meal in the church courtyard under a canvas awning that one of the local carpenters erects each year and takes down the next day. The tables are long planks set on trestles covered in white linen, and the food is what everyone has brought: bread and cheese, olives and pickled vegetables, a dish of stewed beans, salted fish, honeyed pastries, and wine from the taverns along the Golden Horn, poured generously into clay cups. This is where we see them together. Theodoros sits near one end of the table, eating slowly, listening more than speaking. Beside him is Meletios, who arrived late and slightly out of breath, having left Nikos to watch the vats. A task the boy accepted with a relief that Meletios noticed and pretended not to. The two men have known each other for more than 20 years. Their friendship is the kind that does not need explanation or maintenance. It exists the way a wall exists, built once and still standing, weathered but sound. They do not have much in common on the surface. Theodoros is deliberate, interior, a man who weighs his words the way he weighs gold wire. Meletios is looser, quicker to laugh, more comfortable in a crowd, but there is a thing between them that goes deeper than temperament, a mutual recognition, perhaps, of what it means to spend your life making something with your hands, to carry a craft in your body the way other men carry prayer or ambition. They understand each other's silences. Soteria is there too, seated across the table with two women from the neighborhood, the wife of the soap merchant and an older woman named Katerina, who serves as the quarter's midwife and has delivered half the children at the table. Soteria has brought a small glass bottle of scented oil, rose and myrtle blended, which she passes around as a gift for the feast. and the women anoint their wrists and the backs of their hands, and for a few minutes the conversation is all fragrance, where the roses are blooming earliest this year, whether the monastery of St. John has a better crop than the convent of the Theotokos, and whether the old method of distilling with copper gives a truer scent than the newer glass alembics that some of the perfumers have begun to use. Soteria answers their questions with the easy authority of someone who knows her subject completely, and there is a warmth in her voice when she speaks about the roses that is different from her usual careful composure, freer, less guarded, as though the flowers give her permission to be something other than composed. Eleni is helping to clear plates, moving along the table with the quiet efficiency that is her natural mode, but she pauses when the scented oil reaches her end of the table, and she holds the bottle to her nose and closes her eyes for a moment, and something in her face, a flicker of recognition, of pleasure, of connection to something beautiful that has nothing to do with gold wire, is visible for just an instant before she hands the bottle on and returns to her work. Theodoros watches her from his end of the table. He watches her the way he watches the gold wire in his pliers, with an attention so focused it might be mistaken for something else, something sterner, but it is not sternness. It is the gaze of a man who is trying to see clearly, who knows that what he sees will require something of him, and who is not yet ready to know what that something is. After the meal, as the tables are cleared and the children run between the courtyard and the street, Theodoros and Miletios walk together along the colonnade, and the conversation turns, as it often does, to work. Theodoros describes the pendant of the Archangel Michael, the difficulty of the wing feathers, each one a separate cell of gold wire that must curve without crimping. Miletios describes a batch of crimson silk that came out unevenly, the color deeper on one side than the other, a mystery he has been turning over in his mind. They speak about these things the way musicians might speak about a difficult passage, with shared understanding and the pleasure of talking to someone who knows what the difficulty actually is. And then Miletios says something about Nikos. He does not say much. He mentions that the boy asked about the university again, about what subjects are taught there, and that he did not know what to tell him. He says it lightly, as if it is a small thing, but Theodoros has known Miletios long enough to hear what lies beneath the lightness, and he does not offer advice, because he knows that advice is not what is being asked for. Instead, he walks in silence for a few paces, and then he says something about Eleni, about how she has begun grinding the glass differently, finer than he taught her, and how the color is better for it, and how he does not know what to do with the fact that his daughter may understand something about the work that he does not. The two men look at each other, and there is a moment of recognition that needs no words. Two fathers standing in the same bewildering country, watching their children become people they did not plan for. The roses come in late May, as they always do, as though the city has been holding its breath and now releases it in a great exhale of color and scent. The damask roses bloom first. The kazanlik, with its loose pink petals and its fragrance so sweet and so deep that standing in the middle of a blooming hedge feels like standing inside a sound. Then the white albus, cooler, subtler, with their blue-green leaves. Then the wild gallicas with their dark red petals and their sharp, bright perfume. The monastery gardens overflow. The hedgerows along the open land within the walls become rivers of pink and white. The rose sellers appear on the mese with armloads of cut stems wrapped in damp linen, and for a few weeks the whole city carries the scent, mixing with the bread and the salt air and the ever-present smoke of the charcoal braziers to create something that no other city in the world smells like, something that travelers will remember for the rest of their lives. For Soteria, the rose harvest is the axis on which her year turns. She is up before dawn, moving through the monastery garden of the Theotokos with a basket over her arm and 3 hired women beside her, their fingers quick and careful among the thorns. The roses must be picked before the dew dries. This is the rule that every perfumer knows, because the morning moisture holds the volatile oils in the petals, and once the sun hits them, the fragrance begins to dissipate, rising into the air instead of waiting to be captured. They work in near silence, the only sounds the soft snap of stems and the rustle of petals settling into the baskets, and by the time the first slant of sunlight reaches the garden wall, the baskets are full, and they are walking quickly back through the streets to the shop, where the copper still is already heating over its charcoal fire. The distilling is slow, patient work. The petals go into the copper vessel in layers, covered with water, and a gentle heat coaxes the essential oils out of the plant material and into the steam, which rises through the neck of the vessel and passes through the glass alembic, a long tube cooled by wet cloths wrapped around it, and condenses on the other side into a clear liquid that drips slowly, slowly into a glass receiving flask. The liquid is rose water. Floating on its surface, if the petals were good and the heat was right, there will be a thin film of pure rose oil, the attar, the essence, worth more by weight than most metals. A full morning's harvest of roses, carried by 4 women through the streets in heavy baskets, will produce a quantity of rose oil that can be measured in drops. Soteria watches the distillation the way Theodoros watches his gold wire, with an attention that is both technical and something more, something almost devotional. The steam carries the scent of roses through the whole shop, out the open door into the colonnade, where passers-by pause and breathe in and smile without knowing why. This is the perfumer's gift to the street, and Soteria is aware of it, aware that her work for these few weeks becomes public, becomes part of the city's experience of itself. She takes pride in this, quietly, and it shows in the care she brings to every step of the process. On the 3rd day of the harvest, Theodoros appears at her door. He has come, he says, to buy rose water for the workshop. He uses it to clean his tools, to soften the adhesive paste, and the truth is that these are things he could send Eleni to buy. But he has come himself, and Soteria knows this, and she does not remark on it. She measures rose water into a glass bottle for him and seals it with wax, and while she works they talk about the harvest, about the quality of this year's damask roses compared to last year's, about the monastery garden and whether the nuns have been following the old advice from the Geoponica about planting garlic near the rose beds to sweeten the scent. It is a conversation about roses, only about roses, and yet something in it is more than roses, a gentleness in the way they speak to each other, an ease that suggests long familiarity and something else beneath it, something unfinished, something that has the quality of a question neither of them has quite found the words to ask. Eleni comes in the early afternoon to help with the second distillation. She works alongside Soteria with a naturalness that Soteria notices and values. The younger woman's hands sure and unhesitating, her understanding of the process quick and physical rather than theoretical. Eleni asks about the alembic, about the temperature of the water, about how Soteria judges when the oil is separating properly. And the questions are good questions, craftsman's questions, the kind that come from someone who thinks with her hands. Soteria answers them fully without condescension, and there is a moment late in the afternoon when the two women are standing side by side watching the rose water drip into the flask, and the light through the doorway is golden, and the air is heavy with scent, and neither of them speaks. And the silence is the companionable silence of two people doing work they understand in a place where they feel at home. June comes, and with it a commission that changes the rhythm of Theodoros's workshop. A deacon from the Church of the Holy Apostles arrives one morning with a request: a pair of small enamel medallions for the binding of a new gospel book, one depicting Christ Pantocrator, the other the Virgin Theotokos. The work is to be of the highest quality. The deacon names a price that is generous and a deadline that is not. The book must be ready for the Feast of the Transfiguration in August. Theodoros accepts the commission with a nod, and the deacon leaves, and the workshop shifts into a different register, more focused, more urgent, the daily hours of work stretching from dawn past evening. 2 medallions, each one no larger than a man's palm, and yet each one will require weeks of labor. First the design drawn on wax, then transferred to the gold base plates, then the painstaking construction of the wire outlines, the face of Christ, the face of the Virgin, each feature defined by walls of gold no wider than a grass blade, then the filling of each tiny cell with powdered glass, then the firing, then the grinding and polishing, then perhaps a second firing if the colors are not right. It is work that demands absolute steadiness of hand and eye, and Theodoros knows with a clarity he has been avoiding for weeks that his hands are no longer absolutely steady. He says nothing about this to Eleni or to Ioannis, his journeyman, who arrives each morning at the same hour and takes his place at the second work table with the solid reliability that has always been his best quality. Ioannis is a good craftsman, careful, thorough, capable of producing clean, competent work. He has been with the workshop for 7 years, and he handles the preparatory stages well, shaping the base plates, annealing the gold wire, preparing the glass. What he does not have, what Theodoros has never quite been able to teach him, is the eye for the whole, the ability to see the finished image living inside the blank gold plate before a single wire is laid. Ioannis works from the design outward, following the pattern as a mason follows a plan. Theodoros works from somewhere inside, feeling the image take shape under his hands the way a sculptor feels the figure inside the stone. And Eleni works the way her father does. He has known this for some time, though he has kept the knowledge at a distance, turning it over in the back of his mind the way a man turns over a coin he has found in the street, unsure whether it is real. But the commission from the holy apostles makes the knowledge harder to avoid, because the work is too much for one pair of hands in the time allowed, and the question of who will execute the second medallion, the Virgin, while Theodoros works on the Christ, cannot be deferred. He assigns it to Ioannis. This is the expected thing, the proper thing, the thing the guild would sanction without question. Ioannis begins the wirework on the Virgin's face with his usual care, and the work is correct. The proportions right, the lines clean. But when Theodoros looks at it at the end of the first day, he sees what he always sees in Ioannis's wirework: competence without breath, accuracy without life. The Virgin's face is rendered faithfully. It does not glow. 3 days later, late in the evening, after Ioannis has gone home, Theodoros finds Eleni at the work table. She has not touched the commission piece. She has taken a scrap of gold plate, an offcut too small for any real use, and she is bending wire on it. He stands in the doorway and watches. She is making a face. Not the Virgin, not Christ, not any prescribed sacred image, but a face nonetheless, a woman's face with wide eyes and a mouth curved in something that is not quite a smile and not quite sorrow. The wirework is extraordinarily fine. The lines have a fluidity that Theodoros recognizes as something his own hands once had more easily, a sureness that makes the gold seem liquid rather than rigid. She has not noticed him. She is absorbed in the way that only true attention can produce. The world outside the work table forgotten, the whole of her being focused on the tiny curve of wire beneath her fingers. He steps back from the doorway. He does not announce himself. He walks to the courtyard and stands in the dark for a long time, looking up at the stars that are just becoming visible above the rooftops, and he thinks about what he has seen and about what it will cost him, not in gold, but in the willingness to change the shape of something he has held in place for 30 years. Midsummer. The days are at their longest, the heat pressing down on the city like a warm hand, and the dye works along the Golden Horn are at their busiest. The silk merchants need their orders filled before the autumn trade, and Meletios is working double batches, 2 vats of indigo and 1 of Kermes red running simultaneously. The courtyard hung with drying silk in every shade of blue and crimson, the air thick with steam and the sharp chemical smell of the mordant baths. His workers move around him like figures in a dance they have performed 1,000 times, lifting, stirring, ringing, hanging, and Meletios is at the center of it, judging color by eye, testing the temperature of the baths with his stained fingers, making the small, constant adjustments that separate a good dyer from an adequate one. Nikos is there, working. He has not complained. He has not refused. He does what is asked of him with a quiet competence that Meletios recognizes as obedience rather than passion, and the recognition sits in his chest like a stone. The boy is good with his hands, better than Meletios was at 16, honestly, more careful with the delicate work of handling silk that must not be snagged or torn. But his goodness is the goodness of a person doing something well because he has been taught to do it well, not because it calls to something inside him. Meletios knows the difference. He sees it every time he lifts a silk from the vat and watches the color bloom. That moment of private joy, of wonder, that has never faded in 25 years of dyeing. Nikos does not feel it. Nikos watches the color change and sees a chemical process, not a small miracle. One evening, after the work is done and the vats are banked for the night, Meletios finds Nikos in the courtyard with a borrowed book, a text on rhetoric, lent to him by the parish priest, Father Arsenios, who has taken an interest in the boy's quick mind. Nikos is reading by the last of the daylight, his lips moving slightly as he works through the Greek, and Meletios stands in the doorway and watches and feels something he cannot name, not anger, not grief, but something between them, a kind of vertigo, as though the ground he has been standing on his whole life has shifted slightly to the left. He sits down beside his son. Nikos closes the book, not guiltily, but with the care of someone putting away something precious. They sit together in the cooling air, and after a while Meletios asks to see the book, and Nikos hands it to him. And Meletios turns the pages slowly, looking at the dense lines of script that he can read only haltingly. His own education having ended where the dye trade began, he asks what the book is about, and Nikos explains something about the structure of argument, about how a speaker builds a case, about the difference between persuasion and proof, and his voice, as he explains, has a quality that Meletios has never heard in it before. It is the quality of love. It is the sound his own voice makes when he talks about color. Meletios hands the book back. He looks at his hands, the permanent stain of them, the record of his life written in indigo and kermes on his own skin. And then he looks at his son's hands, which are young and clean and could become anything. The silence between them is full. It is the silence of a father who is beginning to understand that love sometimes means stepping aside, and of a son who does not yet know that this is what his father is learning. In the morning, Meletios goes to see Father Arsenios at the parish church. The conversation is not long. Meletios asks what would be required for a boy of the quarter, a dyer's son, no connections to the court or the aristocracy, to sit for the examinations at the university school. The priest tells him, "It is not impossible. It is not easy. It will require preparation and a sponsor and a fee that is not small but not ruinous for a family with a successful dye works." Meletios listens, asks a few questions, thanks the priest, and walks home through the morning streets. And the light on the marble paving stones of the Mese is the same light that has always been there. But the world through which he walks is a slightly different world than the one he walked through yesterday. July folds into August, and the heat changes the city's rhythm. The work of the day begins earlier and ends later, with a long pause in the middle when the sun is directly overhead and the stone streets radiate heat like the walls of a kiln. People retreat to their courtyards, their shaded rooms, their rooftops where the evening breeze off the Bosporus might reach them. The fountains become gathering places, women filling jugs in the early morning, children splashing in the overflow in the afternoon, old men sitting on the stone benches in the evening, watching the sky change color over the Asian shore. It is in these long evenings that the quieter movements of the story find their space. The days are for work, the commission from the holy apostles occupying every hour of light in Theodoros's workshop, the dye vats running constantly in Meletios's courtyard, Soteria's shelves gradually filling with the bottles and jars of rose water and scented oil that the season has produced. But the evenings belong to something else, something slower, something that does not have a name in the language of guilds and commissions. Theodoros has begun coming to Soteria's shop in the evenings, not every evening, perhaps twice a week, sometimes 3 times. He comes as the light is fading and the other shops in the perfumer's row are closing, and he sits on the bench outside her doorway, not on Petros's stool, never on the stool, but on the stone bench that faces the colonnade, and they talk while Soteria finishes her accounts or cleans her equipment or simply sits in the doorway and lets the last warmth of the day settle around her. They talk about the things people talk about when they have known each other for years and are slowly allowing themselves to know each other differently, about their work, about the neighborhood, about memories of years past, about their children and their worries, and the small pleasures that make a day feel worth its weight. One evening, Soteria tells him about the first time she distilled rose water on her own, the year after Petros died, and how she was terrified that she would do it wrong, that the temperature would be off, or the petals would scorch, or the attar would not separate, and how, when the first drops fell into the flask and the scent rose up and she knew it was right, she had wept, not from grief, though grief was in it, from something closer to relief, the knowledge that she could still do this, that the work was still hers, that the craft had not died with the man who taught it to her. Theodoros listens. He does not speak for a while. Then he tells her about the tremor in his hands, the first time he has told anyone. He describes it simply without drama, a small unsteadiness, worse in the early morning, worse with the finest work. He does not know if it will get worse. He does not know what it means for the work he has left to do. He says these things the way a man describes the weather, as facts observed and reported. But Soteria hears what is beneath the facts because she knows what it means to fear losing the thing that makes you who you are. She reaches across the space between them and takes his hand, the right hand, the one that trembles, and holds it for a moment. His hand is still. In her grip, in the warm evening air, it does not shake. She lets go, and neither of them says anything about what has just happened, and the conversation moves on to other things, and the night comes, and the stars appear above the rooftops, and the city settles into its late quiet. The distant sound of the harbor, the murmur of a prayer from the parish church, the cry of a nightjar somewhere in the gardens inside the walls. In the workshop, late at night, Eleni works by lamplight. The commissioned medallion of the Virgin is progressing. Ioannis's wire work, careful and correct, is nearly complete, and the glass filling will begin soon. But on her own scrap of gold, in the hours after the others have gone, Eleni has been making something else. Not a commission, not a prescribed image. A small enamel of her own design, a single rose, rendered in gold wire and glass, the petals layered in shades that move from deep red at the center to the palest pink at the edges. It is not a sacred image. It is not anything the workshop has ever produced. It is simply beautiful, and it is hers, and the making of it has taught her something she could not have learned any other way, that her hands know things her father's hands do not, and that this knowledge is not a betrayal but an offering. August deepens. The feast of the Transfiguration approaches, the 6th of August, the deadline for the Holy Apostles' Commission, and the workshop enters its final, most demanding days. The Christ Pantocrator medallion is nearly finished. Theodoros has fired it twice, and the glass is fused cleanly, the colors true, the deep blue of the robe, the warm brown of the face, the gold leaf halo shimmering behind the wire outline. It is good work. It is among the best he has done. He knows this not with pride, but with the quiet certainty of a man who has spent enough years at a craft to recognize when the work has exceeded the worker, when something has come through his hands that is more than his hands alone could have made. The Virgin medallion is also complete, fired and polished, Ioannis's wire work filled with glass in the soft colors tradition prescribes. A dark red mephorion, a blue robe, the gold of the halo. It is competent, it will serve. But when Theodoros holds the two medallions side by side, he can see what anyone with eyes for the work would see, that one is alive and the other is correct, and that these are not the same thing. He wraps them both carefully in soft linen and places them in the wooden box that will carry them to the church of the holy apostles. The commission is fulfilled, the payment will come, the workshop will go on, and yet something in Theodoros has shifted over the course of this summer, something that the tremor in his hands and the evenings with Soteria and the sight of Elene's wirework have quietly, insistently rearranged. He has been holding the workshop in a shape that made sense for 30 years. Master and journeyman, father and helper, the craft passed from hand to hand along the lines that the guild expects. He has been holding it in this shape because it was the shape he inherited, and because changing it would require him to see things he has not been ready to see. On the evening after the medallions are delivered, Theodoros asks Elene to show him what she has been making. She hesitates, not from secrecy, but from the vulnerability of showing something that matters. Then she brings the small enamel rose to the work table and sets it under the lamp. It is extraordinary. The wire work is finer than anything the workshop has produced, not because it is more precise than Theodoros's, but because it moves differently, with a fluidity that makes the gold seem almost organic, as though the wire had grown into the shape of the petals rather than been bent into it. The glass colors are unconventional. She has mixed shades that the workshop has never used. A deep rose red transitioning to a pink so pale it is almost white, each petal a different hue, the whole piece shifting in the lamplight the way a real flower shifts when you turn it in your hand. Theodoros looks at it for a long time. He picks it up, tilts it, watches the light move across the surface. Then he sets it down and looks at his daughter, and what passes between them in that look is something that the story has been building toward without ever saying so. A recognition, a yielding, a transfer of something that is not ownership and not permission, but something older and more fundamental. It is the look of a craftsman seeing the future of his craft in someone else's hands and finding that the future is not what he imagined and that this is not a loss. He does not make a speech. He does not say, "You are the one." What he says is something smaller and more honest, something about the rose, about the way the color moves, about a technical detail in the wire that he would not have thought to try. He speaks to her as one craftsman to another, and in doing so he changes everything between them without changing anything at all. Across the city in the dye works on the Golden Horn, Meletios is teaching his second son, Stavros, 12, cheerful, entirely untroubled by existential questions about his future, how to judge the depth of an indigo bath by the color of the foam on its surface. Nikos is not there. Nikos is at the parish church with Father Arsenios, working through a passage of Aristotle's rhetoric in preparation for the university examination in the autumn. Meletios knows this. He chose this. The choosing cost him something, not money, though the fees are real, but the surrendering of a picture he had carried in his mind for 16 years, the picture of his son standing where he stands, inheriting his colors, carrying the stain of the work on his own hands. The picture is gone now, replaced by something less defined, less certain, and also, though he would not yet say this, more honest. His son's hands will carry different stains. The vats will go to Stavros, who loves them with the uncomplicated love of a child who has not yet learned to want anything else. And Nikos will go where his mind takes him, which is somewhere Meletios cannot follow, and the pride and the grief of this are braided together so tightly that he does not try to separate them. He lifts the indigo silk from the vat and watches the color bloom, green to blue. The air does its work. Stavros watches, wide-eyed, and says the color looks like the sea at evening, and Meletios smiles, really smiles. The smile of a man who has found the person his knowledge was always meant for, and says, yes, yes it does. Late August. The heat has begun its long, slow surrender to something cooler. Not autumn yet, not truly, but the promise of it, a softening at the edges of the day. The mornings carry a faint chill that was not there a week ago, and the light has changed, turning from the flat white blaze of midsummer to something more golden, more slanted, casting longer shadows through the colonnades and along the marble streets. The roses are long finished, their petals distilled into the bottles on Soteria's shelves, but the city is still fragrant, with ripening figs from the gardens inside the walls, with the resinous scent of pine smoke from the bathhouses, with bread and charcoal and sea salt, and the thousand other notes that make up the perfume of Constantinople in the warm months. In the workshop south of the Forum of Constantine, the tools are clean and the shelves are ordered, and the gold wire sits in its box, waiting. Theodoros has begun something new, not a commission, but a collaboration, though he has not used that word. He and Eleni are working together on a small devotional icon, an image of the Theotokos, the Mother of God, designed by Eleni and executed by both of them, her wire work and his, side by side on the same gold plate. It is an experiment. It is also, though neither of them would say this, a declaration that the workshop is becoming something it was not before, something with two voices instead of one. Ioannis watches this development from his work table with the careful blankness of a man who is recalculating his future, and the story does not resolve his uncertainty, because some things take longer than one summer to work themselves out. At the dye works, the autumn orders are filled and the vats are cooling, and Meletios sits in his courtyard in the late afternoon with a cup of wine and watches the light on the golden horn and thinks about his son and about the silk that is drying on the frames behind him and about the fact that both of these things, the boy and the cloth, are changing color in ways he cannot entirely control, and that this is perhaps what it has always meant to be alive. And in the perfumer's quarter, as the shops close for the evening and the street empties and the colonnade fills with the blue shadows of early dusk, Soteria stands in her doorway and looks out at the Macy, and the city that she's known her whole life is the same city it has always been, the domes, the columns, the distant glimmer of the golden horn, and also not the same, because she is not the same. The stool by the door is still there, Petros's stool, but last week she moved it, not far, just a few inches, to make room for the bench she had a carpenter build beside it. 2 seats now where there was one. She has not explained this to anyone, and no one has asked, and the bench sits empty most of the time, and this is fine. It is enough to know that there is room. The church bells ring for vespers. Across the city in 100 parishes, the faithful gather for the evening office. and the chanting rises from the small stone churches the way heat rises from the streets, slowly, invisibly, filling the air with something that cannot be seen but can be felt. The candles in the icon corners of every home are lit, beeswax tapers made by the chandlers from honey brought by the monks, their small flames reflected in the gold and glass of the household icons, each one a tiny sun in a tiny universe. The fishermen on the Bosporus are turning their boats toward home, their lanterns beginning to appear on the dark water like fallen stars. The harbor is quieting. The merchants have closed their stalls. The bakers are banking their ovens for the night, and the last warmth of the bread drifts through the streets like a benediction. Let the city settle. Let the characters we have followed through this summer continue on in the lives we have glimpsed. Theodoros and Eleni at their work table, finding a new language for an old craft. Meletios with his stained hands and his changing family and his undiminished love for the way indigo blooms in the open air. Soteria in her fragrant shop, making room for something she had stopped believing she would need. Nikos with his books, Stavros with his vats, Ioannes with his careful hands and his uncertain future, Father Arsenios ringing his parish bell, the neighborhood of St. Anastasia, with its shared meals and its small courtesies and its ordinary, irreplaceable grace. Constantinople will go on, the guilds will open in the morning, the ships will enter the Golden Horn, the bread will bake, the silk will dye, the roses will bloom again next spring, and the sacred images that Theodoros has spent his life creating, the tiny faces rendered in gold wire and colored glass, each one a small act of devotion made permanent, will go on shimmering in the candlelight of churches and chapels long after the hands that made them are still. The stars are out now, bright above the domes. The Bosporus is dark and quiet, the water moving slowly between the continents, carrying the reflected light of the city on its surface. The air smells of stone and salt and the last trace of roses, and the night is warm, and the city is old, and the world is very large and very gentle, and there is nothing left to do but rest.